The following series is meant as pure fan fiction, and in no way does it share the views of anyone else or those involved in this story. There will not be a recap of 1999 in this video, as I encourage everybody to go back and watch 1999, as this episode serves as more of a companion piece to that episode. The things that happened in 2000 play off of the things that happened in 1999. I truly encourage everybody to go back all the way to 1994 and watch that video and every video that comes after before watching 2000. Welcome to the new millennium. Let's get right into it. This brings us to the year 2000. January 2000. At the dawn of the new year, Kurt announces that he will be postponing his new album until February. It is reported on MTV. There's some last-minute changes he quote-unquote needs to make. Nobody truly knows the contents of this album, other than the terribly bootlegged MP3s from the Seattle gig back in October. Kurt was in a rush to release his new album after hearing about the bootlegs. He hasn't heard them himself because he doesn't own a PC, although later in the month, he will be shown the tracks from a few friends of his. What fans, or anyone else for that matter, didn't know is the actual changes that Cobain had intended to make to the album at the last minute. Still staying in London for the time being, Kurt will fly home to LA for the initial release of his long-awaited solo debut, and then fly back out to be with his girlfriend in London. Frances Bean would stay with PJ Harvey in London while Kurt flies back to the US, leaving her in PJ's care at this time. Courtney is unaware of this and is now serving her time in the live-in rehab facility. She will remain there until October of 2000. While in London, Frances Bean and PJ Harvey would make songs together. Harvey would always encourage Frances to play guitar and sing, and to show her creativity. They call this project, quote-unquote, girl band. Kurt auctions off the painting he did for the cover of Relevant, along with a few other original works, so he could, quote-unquote, clear some space, with the Relevant painting being sold off for as much as $980,000 by a mystery buyer. Some people joked and speculated that it was Michael Stipe, but those claims would later be proven to be false. Kurt decides to offer half the money out to his mother to buy a new house and to, quote-unquote, get her out of that shitty house in that shitty town. He told her to pick any house she wants to and, quote-unquote, buy it. It's known by this point that Kurt Cobain really doesn't give a damn about money, and he just wants to help his family. As long as he can take care of Frances and his family, he will remain happy. February 2000. Kurt Cobain, Christotomy, is released to the public after much speculation and hype surrounding the album. This album is not what anyone was expecting. More than half of the bootlegged MP3s from the Seattle gig circulating on Napster are not present on this album. Nor is it the double album Kurt had planned and more or less promoted and promised. There is, however, some very key songs on this album. The album is a mix of soft, emotive, melody-driven sleepcore, relentless noise rock, and incomprehensible sound, as well as some weird spoken word commercial-style tracks. It's a very odd album. A lot of this has to do with the changes Cobain had made to the album at the very last minute. Kurt hated the fact that his songs were quote-unquote hijacked and repurposed, and released to the mass public illegally over peer-to-peer file sharing. He felt like releasing those same songs on the album would diminish what the album could have been, and that he'd be releasing the songs to quote-unquote please the masses. He felt like a sellout again, so he remixed some of his album and changed what would have been the core idea, just to make people angry and disappointed. He did it on purpose. The songs that remained, however, are still beautiful new Kurt Cobain songs that fans will come to love on their own and for their own reasons. Songs that aren't connected to anything we know about Kurt Cobain in our real timeline. This is all new material we have never heard, and we may never hear. We just have to use our imagination. A lot of the promised collaborations are missing as well. Kurt felt like he should save those for another time, due to the fact that he changed the entire purpose of this album. It became an experiment. He didn't want to diminish those collaborators by being associated with this album. He knew it was going to piss people off. The name, the cover, the incomprehensible noise inside of the album. All of it. Kurt knew that creating this album was a massive risk in itself. Releasing it to the public view is an entirely different story. Initial reviews of the album show massive praise for the songs that were left intact on the album, but the rest of the album left fans and critics confused and wondering what the point to this album was. What was Kurt trying to say? Nobody at the time knew why most of the quote-unquote amazing songs from the MP3 bootlegs were nowhere to be found. That's what fans wanted. It was the closest thing to early 90s Nirvana, and the anticipation for those songs to have high-quality studio versions was immense, and could have potentially skyrocketed Cobain back into the mainstream. Those tracks do still exist, but they are not present on the album Kurt has just released. Instead, now being replaced with quote-unquote weird spoken word phone call conversations or something. And relentless noise rock, something a band like Shellac would make. These tracks are only in Cobain's possession. The initial release of the album is massive, selling 300,000 copies in the first week, but falling off the charts quickly after fans realized the much anticipated songs from the bootlegs are not on the album. The entire album would be ripped onto PCs and spread like wildfire across the internet. Critics absolutely tear this album into pieces, with a lot of people wondering what Kurt was even thinking by releasing this. It was hyped up to be a masterwork, a double album consisting of some of the best songs Kurt had ever written. This album, however, is far from that. In fact, some of the album is completely unlistenable to casual fans and would quote-unquote drive away regulars, with the album featuring a 7-minute-long finale track titled quote-unquote Vasectomy in 4 Countries. It's nothing more than just ambient sounds and screeching guitar noises. It's pure noise. You wouldn't even know it was Kurt Cobain. Due to the album's title and artwork, Kurt's new album will once again not be sold at stores like Walmart and various department stores. This time he refuses to censor his artwork, saying, quote-unquote, "We did that last time." So ultimately, the album will only be sold at music stores across the country. The album itself was highly offensive to many. It will not release in the UK. Kurt wanted to unleash it into the US and then quote-unquote escape to the UK forever. March 2000. Kurt Cobain does his first interview since the MTV sit-down interview in May of 1999. This time with the magazine NME. He talks about the initial release of the album and what it could have actually been, had he not changed the entire concept last minute. He states, quote-unquote, "If people want to illegally pirate my music, they can have the shitty bootleg versions, and I'll keep the high-quality studio versions for myself." Around this same time, Metallica is suing Napster for copyright infringement after their newest song, I Disappear, is released on the peer-to-peer sharing site, also with terrible audio quality. Kurt would join in on the conversation with Lars, but would not join in on the initial lawsuit like Dr. Dre did, among other artists. Cobain's response to Napster was to release an album that nobody wanted. When asked about the name and artwork of the album, Cobain said he had intended to release something nobody would ever be brave enough to listen to, let alone walk into a store and buy it with their own money. He would also go on to say that he scrapped the songs because he didn't think it would be as good as any Vaseline's record. Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers would be quoted as saying, "Only Kurt Cobain could get away with making that album. Nobody else on the face of the planet could have ever gotten away with that, and I'm here for it." Chris Novoselic would say about the album, "It's so offensive in every sense of the word. It's offensive visually and musically, but it's definitely Kurt, and I love it for that reason alone. Wish I was a part of it, honestly. If the songs he left on the album are as good as they are, I'd love to hear the songs he kept to himself. I was there in Seattle when he performed, and it brought me back to the good old days of Nirvana Mania. Yeah, I was part of that." Kurt is pressured by the media into playing more shows and doing a tour for the album to quote-unquote give fans what they want. Kurt claims that people will just bootleg it and spread it across the internet again. Not long after the release of the album, Pat Smear walks away from the band and music altogether to attend to family matters. It's well known Pat wasn't interested in doing a tour either. April 2000. A video for one of Cobain's songs will be released on April 5th, 2000. It would feature Kurt sitting on a stool in a dark room lit by only a small hanging light bulb. Strumming and singing to the song, the light would sway, and in the background you would see that Kurt is sitting in a high school gym type setting. Almost as if this is where Smells Like Teen Spirit has left him after all of these years. A 12-city tour around the U.S. is planned, with the scheduled tour dates being relatively close together, within driving distance so Kurt can just drive there on his own whenever he needs to. No plane rides are necessary. Kurt rents out his studio space inside of his home to smaller producers, allowing producers and bands to work on music while he's not even present. Kurt basically rents out his entire house as a lodge for bands to stay while recording their new material. May 2000. Kurt finishes 4 of the scheduled dates and the rest of the tour is cancelled after Kurt is found unconscious in his vehicle, parked inside of his garage with the door closed, and the engine running. He is found by a member of Veruca Salt, who was at Kurt's home studio at the time recording some tracks. Cobain would say that it was an accident caused by sleep deprivation. Kurt did an entire 8-hour drive alone, coming back from one of the scheduled gigs in his 12-city tour. He would go on to say that it won't happen again, and he is going to cancel the rest of the tour to prevent such a thing happening again in the future. The incident is spread to MTV with a lot of fans believing it was a suicide attempt, or that Kurt is back to his old ways. After the incident, Kurt pulls the album from any further production, leaving it as a limited time only sale. At this time, Kurt could care less about the money or the revenue he may gain from any future album sales. He's over it. He feels like the public has won by uploading his music to the internet. He states that, quote-unquote, "It's all over the internet now. They can keep it. I'm retiring from music." At this time, leading into the summer of 2000, Kurt is still in the spotlight, but his album is being completely picked apart by the press and the media. He knew he was releasing an album that nobody would want to listen to unless they were absolute die-hard fans of Kurt's. The media can't seem to understand that. They can't seem to understand that releasing the album in this state was intentional. Everyone still wants a piece of Kurt. Nothing he makes or releases will ever just be able to slide by or go unnoticed. Kurt decides he's going to fly back to London to be with PJ Harvey. He will remain there for the majority of the year 2000. June 2000. While in the UK, Kurt finally gets the chance to meet Noel Gallagher of Oasis. Upon the initial meeting, the first thing Noel says to Kurt is, quote unquote, "I absolutely fucking hate your new album." Kurt would respond with a simple, "Thank you for understanding it." The two hit it off immediately and seemingly become good friends after the fact. Their sense of humor is similar, and they share a love for the same bands and types of music. Nothing musical is playing between them at this time, but they agree to hang out again in the future. Kurt also gets in contact with Paul McCartney of the Beatles. They talk over the phone and Kurt basically gushes out his love for the Beatles to Paul, who respects Kurt's work, and the two make plans to meet someday in the future. Cobain would later try to get in contact with Lane Staley, who is presumably in rehab at this time. But after initially calling the Exodus rehab facility, Kurt is told that Lane has not checked in and that he is not present. Kurt hangs up and moves on with his day, planning to try to contact Lane at his home later in the week, but also to no avail. July 2000. While still residing in the UK, Kurt is contacted by MTV and asked to be present at the 2000 MTV VMAs to present an award for Best New Artist. He is also to be nominated for Best Male Performance. He downright declines this offer. Around the same time, he would also decline to do several interviews with different magazines and media outlets. Christotomy is still being completely picked apart and left to wreak havoc on the US airwaves. Kurt feels relatively off the radar when he's in London. He isn't being chased around in airports with people trying to get photos of him. It's almost like people don't care about him when he's in London. He can freely walk the streets. He enjoys that about being there. At this time, he has no intentions on going back to the United States unless he has to. He does still have a home and private studio there, as well as running his own independent label. At this time, he's making motions to have the headquarters of his label moved to the UK. That may prove to take some time. August 2000. Not much notable happens during the next few months. Kurt pretty much stays hidden and out of the spotlight, spending most of his free time sightseeing with his daughter and PJ Harvey in the UK. He takes Frances to France, as well as Poland and Switzerland. Frances gets to see more of the world when she's with her father. Courtney will be free from her rehabilitation term in just 2 months. At that time, she will be able to appeal for the custody of Frances. When that time comes, Kurt will be required to fly back to the US to attend the trial hearings once again. The anxiety of this is weighing in on him heavily at this time. A Spin magazine article is released about Cobain's new album. In the article, the journalist slams Kurt, claiming he must have some weird fetish for derailing his own career. He would also state that Cobain has a very special set of new songs that were long awaited for by fans, but Cobain declined to deliver thanks to the quote-unquote growing strength of the internet. Fan interest in the album is at an all-time low, with many just tired of the tabloids and the media ripping it apart. It does, however, garner a cult underground following in the United States. September 2000. The talk of Christotomy has finally died off, with the initial production of the album coming to a halt. Critics have stopped talking about it in articles since the Spin magazine release, due to the lack of response from Cobain himself. It's essentially forgotten about by this point. It was an experiment and a publicity stunt all on its own. It did what Cobain wanted it to do, but it failed commercially. Kurt flies back to the U.S. to help his mother and sister finalize the purchase of a new home. October 2000. Courtney finishes her rehabilitation term that was ordered by the court during her trial hearing of October 1999. She is now fully clean of all the drugs she was taking, and at this time is still required to pass drug tests and mental examinations with her social workers. Courtney is now able to appeal to the court in another custody battle for her daughter. She doesn't plan to do this immediately, as it will take some time to further build her case. But at this moment, her life is now getting back on track. Cobain is contacted by Paul McCartney once again. A date is set for the two to meet and potentially work on a song together sometime in the future. Kurt will meet with Paul sometime in the new year, while still in the UK. Back in September, Kurt purchased a brand new home for his mother and sister. They chose to remain in Aberdeen, where Kurt grew up. He's now back in the UK, awaiting word on whether or not Courtney plans to take him back to court. At the end of the month, Cobain attempts to contact Lane Staley once again. Lane again neglects to pick up the phone at this time. November 2000. Kurt is summoned to court and a date is given for December 16th, 2000. He will again fight for custody for his daughter. Courtney is out now, and she refuses to live without the option to see her daughter in any capacity. Kurt begins to get more stressed out about the inevitable battle in court. He regrets even coming this far. The custody battle was his idea, but in the long run, it made his and Frances' life better, and he hasn't had to worry about it in quite some time. PJ Harvey embarks on a European tour for her newest album, and will not be present for the court hearing, as she will be gone across the country. Kurt will, however, be required to return to the United States. December 2000. Kurt flies back to the U.S. with Frances to prepare for his court hearing. He's mad at Courtney for all of this. He blames her for not being a good mother. If she was a good mother, he feels like this custody battle wouldn't have had to happen. The new custody hearing is all over the media again. It's becoming tiresome for Kurt. His personal life just can't find its way out of the spotlight. On December 5th, 2000, tabloids and paparazzi gather around Kurt's house, taking pictures and shouting out various different questions to him. Kurt would come out into the driveway, the same driveway in which he shot that crazed fan back in 1998. He would yell at the press stating, quote unquote, "Leave me the fuck alone and get off my property." With one member of paparazzi getting closer and closer to Kurt's door, blatantly on the property, yells to Kurt, quote unquote, "Good luck with the custody battle." At this point, Kurt is angry. He goes back in and comes back out with a shotgun, in which he cocks in front of everyone, and the entire crowd quickly disperses. Kurt has literally only been home for a half of an hour. This incident further driving his hate for the United States. December 16th, 2000. Courtney's appeal hearing begins. Cobain and Love are both present at opposite ends of the courtroom. The judge in this case, who considers himself a family man, has been watching the case closely throughout the past couple years. He's watched both Cobain and Love's separate recoveries. He's witnessed a turnaround in both their lives. At this time, he can't find any legit reason why either parent can't take care of their child or be granted with custody. But it's not that easy. Joint custody simply wasn't working. The constant need for nannies and the flying back and forth between cities and houses wasn't working. It's at this moment the judge shows his true heart and allows 8-year-old Frances Bean to speak to the court. Frances would state that she loves living with her father and his new girlfriend, PJ Harvey, whom Love doesn't seem to like very much, for obvious reasons. And that she doesn't wish to change that and hopes one day both parents can just get along. Frances states that she loves her mother very dearly and is sad that this is what it has come to. Courtney would address the court and state that she doesn't want her daughter to be unhappy, and if living with her doesn't make her happy, then she can't allow it. At this time, Courtney asks the court to grant Kurt full custody for that simple fact alone. She then looks over at Kurt and says, quote unquote, "Kurt, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I never wanted any of this, and I know you didn't either. We've both been through a lot of our own shit, and it should just end here." Kurt simply just nods while staring at his feet. The judge states that it will take a lot more for him to decide what will happen in the case of custody of Frances, but that what he's seen here today was very clearly a broken family that needs time to heal. He asks for all parties to go home and think, and for them to decide when it is time to come back to flesh this thing out. At the time being, Kurt is still granted temporary custody and is free to go back to the UK with his daughter anytime he pleases. The judge also states that Love still has some recovering to do and is looking forward to seeing her progress in the new year. On the way out of the courtroom, Kurt locks eyes with Courtney and simply says, quote unquote, "I'm sorry too. You can still see her." Courtney sheds a few tears and the two walk in separate directions. Kurt and Frances fly back to London and house sit for PJ Harvey while she's out on tour. He will remain there for the rest of the year 2000. This will conclude If Kurt Cobain Lived, 2000. We hope you enjoyed listening, and please stay tuned for If Kurt Cobain Lived, 2001. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below.